Welcome to Own the Season podcast. We will talk to industry insiders along with outdoor enthusiasts to help you own your season. Now let's join hosts Art and Michelle Helen with Brad Jones. Own the Season podcast is sponsored by Griffin Armament, the oldest privately owned silencer manufacturer in the United States. Go to griffinarmament.com to learn how you can get a silencer shipped to your door. Griffin Armament, engineered silence.
Hello and welcome to Own the Season podcast. I'm Michelle Helen, and I have with me today Art Helen, Brad Jones, and our special guest is Drew Schliem, host of Predator Podcast. Hey, Drew, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me today. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's good to meet you. How's your season going?
It's going good. I've been busy. I've been traveling. I've been in Kansas, Wyoming, Wisconsin, of course, in the home state of Wisconsin. Just a hop, skip, and a jump from you guys. And it's been, I would say, steady, normal, I would say. Okay. When people ask me, hey, how's the season's going? I'd say, hey, it's normal. It's nothing out of the ordinary.
All right. But a lot of travel, huh?
Yep.
Chasing those predators?
Yep, I certainly like to travel. It's just fun to experience things, different places, just like, people like myself, we like to travel and hunt turkeys and deer and whatever else. You know how it is. Mm-hmm. You guys from doing it for years, just experiencing it somewhere else, a little bit different terrain, a little bit different, maybe the way the animals act is a little different, new country. That's my favorite part about it, just exploring new things for kind of the same experience. But
yeah.
That's interesting that you say that, the animals are different and they act different. And, you don't really think about that. As a deer hunter, I think about it going, okay, you get out west and all you have is tree lines, or all you have is, river bottoms where there's trees. Those deer act different. The way that the deer move, the way that they head to feeding, and where they're, and so that, right off the bat, I never really considered or thought about that because they're a predator, right?
It makes sense, but
does.
you just don't think much about it. What's one thing that sticks out to you as something that you've really noticed being different in another state than it is here?
Well, I'd say number one is pressure. I would say pressure here is greatly higher than almost anywhere, to the west of here. I would say, Illinois might be similar, but I think here is far more pressure than anywhere in the west. So you're gonna get harder call-ins, you're gonna get more call-ins, you're gonna get more daylight action, things like that we don't necessarily get as much of here or have to work really hard for. It comes a little bit more, easier is a bad word, mm-hmm. but they come a little more natural out there.
Nice.
And why is that? Why do you think Wisconsin is so pressured? Is it we have field ground and stuff, but I don't do a lot of predator hunting. I do trapping, and I've always, I've found out recently that it's easier to trap, in set-aside fields or open fields, things like that. Is that kind of what you're finding out, with calling too?
Is it like just bigger ground, bigger land, bigger parcels and open ground?
Yeah, I just think it's less people in general. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not even all hunting pressure. It's, wood cutting, it's shed hunting, it's, all the things that people do in the woods this time of year. I was out in Wyoming last week and I got permission for a 25,000 acre ranch. And I said, hey, does anybody else hunt here? And he's like, not really. And I'm like, okay. So I can hunt 39 square miles and there's no one else hunting. Okay. Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't find that around here. When we go to Kansas, we might go an entire night, dark to dark and not see a vehicle on the road, and so I just think they feel more comfortable being out, being being aggressive, being themselves. They don't have to worry about, sneaking in that ditch and getting a look before they come in like they might do here. I just think it's a comfort and it's all pressure and relative to, to what you're doing.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I just hear more and more people talking about predator hunting now than I have for a long time. So I think in Wisconsin you're seeing a lot more predator hunters, especially with thermal.
Yeah, we call it the thermal boom. It's everybody's hunting with thermal now, and it's certainly changed it in a great deal, I think.
Yeah, And I don't have a thermal. I mean, both of us, we're right here in Wisconsin, so we do a lot with Vortex, like yourself. And, rumor, well, it's not rumor anymore, but we know that they're coming out with a handheld thermal here very soon. If not, by the time this podcast goes live, they'll already, be available for the handheld. Rumor is, though, hopefully by the end of this year or next year that, they will be running a few different scope lines and thermals. And I don't really hunt with thermals, so kind of, maybe it's just because my eyesight, because I'm old. I start thinking about and I've watched all the videos, but how can you really tell the difference between, okay, is it a coyote? Is it a fox? Is it a wolf? I understand with the bobcat, but are they really that clear? Are they that good that you can definitely tell what's what?
Well, it certainly depends on the optic, and it's basically what's going to depend on is the distance you can tell. The higher end your optic is, the farther out you're going to be able to tell. So that's number one. I guess my biggest concern as a thermal hunter would be a domestic dog is what I would want to avoid. And number one thing that is going to tell you it's a domestic dog every single time is there's never been a domestic, or there is very few domestic dogs that's tails go down. Their tails almost always go upward, if that makes sense. So if you see an upward tail, that's a telltale sign it's not a coyote. You'll never see a coyote with an upward tail. Okay. That's number one. It's, I guess for me, I can probably tell that at 600 yards probably on a decent night. I've seen sometimes collars show up in the scope. More often than not, though, I can just tell by how they act. And I would encourage guys that are newer into thermal to, I've let some go before thinking, I'm not going to find out what that is. I would encourage, I've seen videos, I've heard stories, guys that are new going out there and seeing something they think is and letting it rip, and it ends up being a coon, or it ends up being, something else, which is, that part's minor, but when
it just
we're
shows
talking
that they
about,
didn't identify it
right,
correctly.
That's my thing is, you really can tell by how they move, how they act. If it's coming in upwind to me, there's probably a pretty good chance it's not a coyote, because the coyote's almost always going to go to the downwind side. And if it's, we had one in Kansas one year that came up the road for 300 yards, came right past the truck, came 15 yards from us, and we're all like, this has got to be someone's dog. Like, there is no chance this is a coyote. It got to like 15 yards, and we hit it with a flashlight, because we're like, this is surely someone's dog. We hit it with a flashlight. Turns out it was just a super mangy coyote that clearly was not all there. But still, we're not going to ground check them. So, that's the biggest thing, I think, is guys get excited. Oh, there's something right there, and they just automatically think it's a coyote. And as we know, there's a lot of animals out there, and you don't want to do that and false identify. But yeah, I think certainly to come back to your question, I just think it depends on the quality of your optics, and I think people need to understand the limits of those. And if they're shooting a 384 unit, they're probably looking at 200 yards, or 300 yards maybe on a good night to be able to identify things. And eventually, like I said, once you get experience, you're going to learn the way they move, the way they act. You're going to start to figure out, farther out what they are, but doesn't necessarily mean you should start shooting at them either. But yeah, so I think that's the main thing, is just knowing your equipment and what its capabilities are,
Yeah, and that's huge for not only that, but like you said, for identifying animals, that their dogs are looking for those things. And I think, the lesser expensive, sometimes you can't do that. It's just like you look through regular optics. When I used to guide out west, I'd have people all the time, well, why is everybody using these high-end $2,000 binoculars, right?
Yeah.
When I buy my $250 pair of binoculars back home and they work great. They do, until you have to make certain decisions. As Michelle is a birder, you can she can tell you taking, the high-end Razor UHDs and looking at the color and the definition of things. And sounds like it's very similar in the thermals.
It is.
So, and I don't say the worst part, but if you did end up shooting a domestic, which would be absolutely horrible, most of those all record everything, right?
Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, it's all going to be recorded too, no matter what you do. So, yeah, be careful and make sure I guess hunter safety. It's know your target and beyond right away.
That and err on the side of caution. Like, to me, it's not worth that one coyote's not going to make a difference to me whether I get it or I don't. And I've seen it. I've heard of stories. Thankfully, I've never seen it. I've never been in that situation. I've always been able to identify, but I've heard of stories, and I know of people that it's happened to, and they've sold their stuff and just been done with it because it's a scary thing and something nobody ever wants to do. And just being sure of, what you're doing, and it'd be like a buck coming in and you just shooting it before you knew what it was. Did you know it was the buck you wanted to shoot, or was it a 1.5 years old? I don't just shoot first and ask questions later.
Yeah. And, last weekend, as of this taping time right now for this, as of last weekend, Michelle and I were at the Wisconsin Bowhunters Association convention, and I was up there speaking, and I was talking to one of the game wardens up there, and we were talking about some of these thermals and different things, and not only now we're talking coyotes or domestic. He said that this year they had a case where you need to know your laws and regulations too. A gentleman, northern Wisconsin, had drawn a bobcat tag.
Yep.
He was out thermal hunting for coyotes. Bobcat came by. He shot the bobcat because he had a tag.
Ew.
He did not understand the rules and regulations that cats can't be hunted at night with thermals. Well, he brought this cat back in and told one of his buddies. His buddy says, dude, you need to get rid of that cat because you can't shoot him. So what did he do? He tried to dispose of this cat somewhere in the woods. Problem was, it had a collar on it.
Nice.
Oh.
So one, they figured out where the collar was. Two, when they came and did all this investigation stuff, it was recorded on his scope. So this guy, he said, obviously we now have this bobcat in our possession, yada, yada, yada. Well, he said now, because so many people have this on trail camera up there, they all want to buy the cat back from the DNR,
right,
and have it mounted. But again, it goes to the rules and regulations for thermal hunting for certain animals is completely different. So you have to know those. And what are there any other funky rules other than, the bobcat stuff?
I'm trying to think. As far as thermal goes in Wisconsin, not really.
Or just nighttime hunting.
Yeah.
I mean, because
Yeah.
you could, you just can't hunt
I guess
at night.
at night, the only weird rule that's in Wisconsin is with lights, you can only turn it on at the point of impact. So, like, you can basically turn your light on, shoot, and that's it. You can't scan with a light. So, obviously, that's why nobody uses lights, because it's very hard. Like, how do you know if something's coming in? Unless you have a thermal, monocular or something to see them coming in, then it would, in theory, work. But very difficult. But other states, a lot of states have seasons, have whether it used to be in Kansas, it used to be January 1 to March 31st. They just opened it up to September 1 to March 31st, excluding the firearm deer seasons. In the West, it's a lot more open. I mean, in Wyoming, you don't even need a license. In Minnesota, you don't even need a license. It's just come and hunt and shoot all you can, I guess. But But every state, like you really got to look into that, because like I was in Wyoming and Montana. In Montana, I had to have this $10 conservation stamp or something just to be able to hunt public land. So, little things like that I think a lot of people might overlook. Or, we come up on a farmer and he says, oh, you can hunt everything around here. And I'm like, well, is it yours? No. I'm like, okay, well, is it public? And he's like, well, no. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm not hunting it then. Like, like, hey, thanks.
And where does the landowner live?
Yeah, like, hey, thanks for, talking to me and the words of encouragement, but hey, I'm not going to go just hunt. I just believe that you at least got to do things the right way. And, if I'm not as successful, fine. But, just doing things the right way and knowing as you cross these state lines, there's different rules, and understanding what they are, looking into them, Google them, call the board and call the state, agencies, because you can never be too sure about doing things right. Like, in Kansas, you can't hunt bobcats at night either, and a lot of states you can't, some states you can, but again, it's not a shoot and find out type thing. You need to know these things before. I think people get the wrong idea of, oh, it's just a coyote, or it's just, just a predator. You hear people say it all the time, oh, it's just a coyote, but there's still rules to follow, and I always give the comparison to deer hunting. Like, why do you think it's okay to do that with a coyote, but then if you went out there deer hunting, you would follow every rule, every regulation, every, it's not an excuse to just, that's your justification.
Right. Yeah. And I've heard that before.
So, with all your out-of-state hunting and maybe then different season structures, open season, the season's open there and it's not here, how do you manage that, or what type of evidence or proof do you maintain that tells where those coyotes were harvested?
Well, I guess number one is I always take pictures. So that's usually my saving grace. Because, like, I had this happen a couple years ago. Somebody called the warden on me because I took pictures with a great big male coyote here in Wisconsin. Someone just swore up and down it was a wolf. And there was no way that they believed that it was anything but a wolf. They called the warden, hey, this guy shot a wolf, whatever. I'm like, fine. Totally fine. Have the warden get a hold of me. I'll take them to where I shot it. I'll show them the pictures. I'll show them the other pictures where it doesn't look as big. We had the fishing effect. It looked big in that picture. And, things like that. I just think the picture is probably number one. Hey, here's a picture. Here's where it was laying. Here's the backdrop where I was. I think that's number one. And obviously in our phones these days, usually it tags a location with your picture. Usually it says Wyoming or, Montana or whatever. So I think that's the first thing. Other thing is I just like taking pictures in general because they're cool animals and it's a cool experience. I'm going out there for the experience. So why not take a picture?
Where you're visiting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. There's a lot of, we've had some of that, and we get thrown in the spotlight pretty quick. You with the podcast, us with the podcast and the TV show and stuff. And I had that happen a few years ago with a bobcat because I had taken it and I didn't want the tag showing for pictures. So what I did is it was tagged, but it was very thin wire, and I took the tag and shoved it in its mouth. And I luckily had a picture when I threw it over my shoulder where the tag had fallen partway out of its mouth. Because somebody had watched the TV show and called me in, and the warden called me, and I said, hey, come over, we'll go through all the footage, all the pictures, just because of what's on TV. And that's always amazed me is how everybody knows, they watch a 5-minute clip of that trapping sequence or that hunt or whatever, and they know everything that happened that night or that day or where you're at and everything else. And that doesn't always happen, right? And so he came over, we went through everything, and he's like, all right. And he grabbed pictures and took pictures for documentation, and everything's legal, and out the door he went, right? So that's a big thing, is make sure that, if you're going to do it right, and make sure that, you cover all those bases, because no matter what, there's always somebody that's looking to hang you.
Exactly.
And so take care of that stuff, and back to a little bit earlier, you were talking about, these coyotes and they're just a predator, or they're just, and I've heard that so many times where guys are like, yeah, I was driving down the road the other day and I saw one out on such and such road, and so I just got out and shot it in this guy's field. And I'm like, you got permission? They're like, oh, it's just a coyote.
Yep.
No, how would you feel if somebody did that on your property?
Right.
So yeah, I understand it's just a coyote, but in the same time, it's still a living, breathing animal.
Yeah.
And
They still deserve fair chase like
Yes,
everything else does.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's still trespass. It's still someone else's property. It
Yeah.
kind of shows like maybe really what kind of person you are.
Yeah.
If you have different sets of rules for different things.
Right. Exactly. It comes from a place of greed that I want that for me, and that's, you hear it a lot. I think we've gotten away from it a bit, but I used to hear it a lot with turkeys. It's just a turkey. It's just a turkey. But I think over time, it's the sport and the community has shaped that in a different light, which has been great. But I used to hear it all the time when I was younger. It's just a turkey. What are you worried about?
Right.
What was the question I had? Oh, so you said that, there's like an increase in coyote hunting now, attributed at least in part to thermal.
Yep.
The thermal boom. So other than that, that, and it's maybe easier, maybe more fun because you can see them and have more success, the hides aren't worth much.
Yep. That's correct.
Of anything. So like, why are there more people? Like, yeah, is there anything else that you can attribute the increased interest in, predator hunting?
Well, I think number one is it's something to do in the winter.
Okay.
I think a lot of guys do it for leisure, just simply out of, like, we live in a relatively rural, area as a whole. We have a lot of blue collar workers that have a little more availability in the winter, and I think people just simply like to go out occasionally and give it a try for fun. I think people see all the videos and things that people like myself put out there, and they think, oh, that looks cool, I want to do it. Or, you hear from landowners a lot of times that, they're everywhere, you got to get out here. And I think some guys might get into it just simply from, they're a big time deer hunter. They might think that hey, if I get this thermal and can take some coyotes off my deer hunting lease or my property that I hunt, that's going to help, which, it does. But I think those are all reasons. But I think it's just, hey, my buddy's got one, I want to go with him. I think that's probably the most common thing. And it's much more affordable than it used to be. So I would say all those factors, but the price, the availability, you can buy one, off Facebook Marketplace if you wanted to, they're just a lot more available, and the price has gone down. So people are doing it for fun now instead of having to take out a bank loan for one.
Well, let's talk about that. What do you see caliber wise people are using, and what kind of guns? AR platforms, bolt actions? What's the trend right now?
Well, I think the trend has certainly gone back to bolt action rifles, but I think for my first probably 10 years in predator hunting, if someone said I just got a new gun for predator hunting, they're probably going to say it's an AR platform. I think just in the day of suppressors now, I think that the bolt action rifle has really come back simply, for a few reasons, but number one would be a bolt action rifle is much quieter, and two, I think they're much easier to maintain. They're not as dirty. They're, an AR with a suppressor on it that's not a flow through especially is going to get dirty fast. So that'd be a couple of the reasons, but I think right now it's probably, very even between the two, but I think it's certainly growing in the bolt action side. As far as calibers go, I'm a 6mm caliber guy, so 243, 6 Creed, something along those lines. And then, of course, the 22-250 is a staple That's what I choose to use for my daytime hunting rig. And the 22 Arc, the 22 Creed, there's a lot of good calibers out there nowadays. Of course, the 223 is never going to go away. And yeah, I think the 243 certainly gained a lot of ground, especially as more people get into it. How many guys have a 243 in their gun case that they used to use as a deer rifle, or
Still mine.
Still, yeah, that's me too. So it's I think it's just readily available, and it's something that people have found as easy to use. And hey, I got one. Might as well just, instead of buying a new rifle and a new thermal, I can just put it on my
Right.
rifle that I have at home. So that's probably your majority of your calibers people are using these days.
Now, I haven't been like shopping for ammo lately, but is some of that decision still kind of like, for a while there, I was, the kind of saying was, see what ammo you can buy and then buy your gun to match, because
Exactly.
you didn't want to like get a gun and then not be able to find ammo or have it be like through the roof expensive.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a factor for some people. I think it's certainly more, availability isn't much of an issue anymore, but price certainly is. I mean, if you're looking at, I want to say those 6 Creed bullets I just bought recently were maybe, $42 to $44 a box of 20. And I think, if I were to buy 223, they're maybe like 22, 24. So, I mean, there's a $20 difference a box. So, I mean,
Twice as much. You know.
So I think it is certainly a factor for some people. Part of the reason why I went back to a bolt action rifle also is I don't drain 20 rounds for no reason. Just simply out of that, I can't help myself. So,
Oh, sure.
just once you start shooting, sometimes you just can't stop. So, that's been a big factor for me too, is like, I almost save money with more expensive ammo because I don't shoot so much.
Sure.
So I also see, like, when you're buying the thermals, there's a huge price difference between, I mean, you can start off at 1,000 and go all the way up to $7,000 if you want to.
Yeah, for
where,
sure.
Where do you see people, and what do you feel you need to get into the nighttime coyote hunting?
Well, I have this conversation with a lot of people about, what thermal should I get? Should I buy this? Should I buy that? I think it's a really hard thing to say. At least for me, it's hard for me to tell someone else how to spend their money because they are expensive. And my thing is pretty much like, if you can just get what you can afford, you can always use it. You can always sell it. You can always move up. In today's world, you can get a pretty dang good thermal for $1,800. Anything cheaper than that is going to be a little suspect. They might.
It's gonna be cheap.
Yeah, it's going to be cheap. Yeah. And I know that's still not cheap, but it's cheap in the thermal world.
Built cheaply.
Yes.
Like you get what you pay for.
Right, and you're not going to be able to
Right.
identify things. That's what you're mainly getting, is you're paying for more image quality. And then you can go all the way on up. I think, they go, sky's the limit, really. I mean, you can get into the 10, 12 to 15, $18,000. But I think as the general consumer, 6,000 to 7,000 is kind of your top end of what people are spending now, which is a pile. I say that with a $6,000 scope on my rifle, but once you use it, you do see the benefits and what you get from it. But it's just, I think people get too wrapped up in, I need the biggest, the baddest, the best, when they could get something that is, I had somebody ask me the other day about a scope, and he asked, should I get this or that? And, or am I going to wish I didn't buy that? And I knew right away, as soon as he said that, I'm like, well, I know you've never looked through the scope you're asking me about, because that scope is exceptional. It'd be like, someone asking you if that Viper, line from Vortex is any good. You'd be like, well, yeah, of course it's good, But, I think just getting your hands on them, looking through them, getting with a reputable dealer, I think one thing people really steer wrong is, I really encourage people to buy things with warranties, because they are electronics. They do have error issues. You might drop it. You might accidentally break it. Your toddler might knock it off your desk. Whatever can happen.
I hope I don't have any more toddlers.
Speak for yourself.
Your pet. I mean, pets
Or your pet,
can,
yeah.
You know.
Right. And I think that can be a big mistake people make. And because as long as I always tell people this when you're buying something, or if I'm trying to sell somebody something, is it's got warranty on it, so you're covered. If something happens to it, you can at least know you're safe to at least replace it or fix it, however that works out. But, you know, buying things without warranty, if something happens to it, it's a boat anchor, you know, and that's a lot of money to spend on something to, you know, imagine spending that much money on anything, you know, and not having some type of, most of them now have a 5-year warranty, which is, most people don't keep them 5 years. Most people are selling and upgrading by then anyways. But if you're looking to buy, I would really encourage people to always be sure of what the, you know, what kind of warranties on it. Ask for a receipt, ask for some type of proof that there's a warranty on it, because I've seen people with deals go south in a hurry, you know, and then you're stuck with it.
Yeah. At least then if you're making an investment, you know, whatever it is, because if you're, you know, getting what you can afford, but especially if you are like, okay, I think I'm going to invest in this slightly better model, you know, at least then your investment is covered.
Right. And then it has resale value too. If it still has warranty on it, I have a much easier chance to sell this and upgrading, or maybe I don't like it. I have people will say, oh, I got it, tried it, don't like it. Okay, then sell it. But if you don't have a warranty, it's going to be harder to get rid of, or you're going to have to bring the price way down.
Right. So sounds like we've covered a lot of ammunition stuff and a lot of the gun stuff. How about, you know, calling? Do you do much handheld stuff? Do you do all electronic? I mean, there's a ton of different ones out there. You know, if I'm calling, you know, I've done stuff with Johnny Stewart's back in the day. I had Fox Pros, and it seems like all of them are really good unless you go extremely cheap again.
Yep.
But is there, you know, how do you look at, is there a certain time of year that you're doing things, certain calls, different stuff? How does that fluctuate throughout the year?
Yeah, so there's a lot of parts to that question, but I would say number one, to start the question, I pretty much all use an e-call pretty much all the time. I'll hand call in about 2 a year, just off of either, you know, you're walking in, you see one, it's what I got on my neck, or I got trail camera pictures of one, and I'm on the road, don't have my call, but I have a hand call with me, something of that nature. I always have them with me just for the outside chance your call breaks or freezes or dies, or, you know, something of that nature. But I would say, yeah, I'm pretty much always using an e-call. And yeah, like you said, they are, as long as you're getting a decent one, they're all good. Doesn't matter the brand. I choose to use Fox Pro, and I use the X24 specifically. If anyone's curious, it's just a high quality option, and I've come to really like it. But as far as the year and what I'm using, you know, understanding the life cycle of a coyote is kind of what revolves how I attack things. So we're in, you know, March at the time of this recording, so we're knocking on the door of, you know, denning, having pups. I think a lot of people think they have their pups in March, which is possible, I would say, but more so it's in mid-April time frame. And I would say, so you're right now, you're going to be playing, you know, your pup type sounds, you know, your pup fights, your pup, you know, more territorial sounds, because those breeding pairs are very, very protective over where they have chose a den location, which they've probably chose a den location by now, but they might not be in it, but they're probably very close to that area and guarding it. And in general, a breeding pair is going to be very aggressive of their breeding territory in general. You know, there's a lot of transient coyotes out there, and there's a lot of, you know, different coyotes out there, of course, but that breeding pair is usually that aggressive, you know, howling, causing problems type, you know, because they're protecting this area. And you'll see in the winter time, December through February kind of time frame, you're going to see super aggressive female coyotes, because female coyotes are very aggressive over their breeding territory, or what they've established as their breeding territory. So you'll a lot of times get, hard charging call-ins and, mouthy barking, howling coyotes. And a lot of people, I think, just assume they're big males, and then they shoot them and they realize, oh, that's a female. So I think, this time of year, it's a lot of pup sounds. And then about April, I'm going to stop hunting for a while. Then the pups in the ground time of year is a really hard time to call. And it's conveniently when I like to hunt turkeys. So
I'm switch gears for a little bit.
Yeah, and I do need that break to kind of reset. And then summertime can be really aggressive time of year too, just because they have pups and they are super territorial. Obviously, when like most things, when a bear has cubs, they're a lot more aggressive. So the same thing goes for coyotes. The summertime is usually a very vocal heavy. I'm not even going to play a distress sound, probably, just simply because a lot of times those pups don't even know what a distress sound is. So there's not really a point. Not saying it can't work, but I'm just saying it's not as productive. And then, you get into that October time where you're kind of going to get that family bust up time of year from October, December, September, maybe a little September, October, maybe into November. You're going to have that time where all these family groups are busting up. Not all of them. Some will stay together, but so that time of year is when I'm going to start breaking into my distress sounds. That's when you got a lot of coyotes on the landscape the most of the year, typically. And that's when you can have those, younger coyotes that hear a free meal and they come piling into, the old cagey cottontail or something of that nature. And then as you get into December, end of November, December time, that's when, now everything's going to be looking for a partner, a mate. So that's when your lone howls, your, breeding sounds are going to start to come in. I think a lot of people think you got to wait to play breeding sounds until, middle of January to February. But it's like the way I always correlate things to deer hunting, because, I've been a deer hunter my whole life, and it'd be like seeing a buck on October 25th and not grunting at him because you think, well, the rut's not started yet, but it's kind of that pre-rut time is the way I look at it. They can be aggressive and, feisty and lonely, all those things. So that November to December. And then once you get into January, that's when you're going to start to, see people or hear people use the word paired up. The word paired up is a hard one for me because they're almost always paired up. They're almost always, like, a lot of times these breeding pairs don't repair. Like, they stay together all the time. So, people use the phrase paired up, but usually it's one of two things. It's already a breeding pair, or it's a family group that's all together and they're still together, or a pup group that's still together, or something of that nature. They're just, by nature, they're not lonely animals. They're almost always social. They're very social. So that's why I choose to be very vocal heavy in my approach of what I call. I would say, I don't call in a ton of coyotes every year with distress type sounds, but most of mine come off of vocals and fights and, stuff like that. So that's kind of how I move through the year of sounds. Obviously, I think one of the important things that I'd like to mention is I think there is not one way to do things. Like, there is so many ways you can be successful. And I think it's important that people find their own way and figure out what works for them, because it makes you more confident in your approach. It makes you have something that you're going to do. And then when it doesn't work, you can try something else. But like, just going out there and saying, well, this person told me to do this and it didn't work. It just creates that, like, oh, that didn't work. So now I don't know what to do. So that's one thing that I always encourage people to do is just try things until you figure out what works and figure out what works for you, and then roll with it. And if it doesn't work, try something else.
Mm-hmm. Right. I always think like this might be kind of similar. We have a friend of ours that's we fish a lot with, and he's an excellent fisherman, muskie fisherman. He could guide if he, wanted to guide muskie fishing. And, we'd be out casting, right? And he's, he'll change his lure every 15 minutes if he doesn't have any sign of a fish, Yep. Where like I would have thought otherwise you'd think like, oh, it's not a good day for fishing today. The fish aren't biting. He's thinking they don't like what I'm offering.
Right.
So let's change it up. And maybe it's changing the speed, and how he's working the lure. Or it just might be changing the lure where before, I would just be like, oh, it's not a good day for fishing. Yeah. But instead of just keeping, do you do that too? Like, if it's not working, change up what you're playing on the collar.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's a fantastic point. Very similar to muskie fishing. I think, if you listen to people that are predator hunters out there, have probably heard of Tory Cook with MFK, game calls. He talks a lot about triggers and finding, triggers. And I've learned over the years from being able to see coyotes travel long distances coming to calls. Sometimes there are triggers, and I've done it where they're out there at 400 yards and you play 15 different sounds, and all of a sudden you just hit that one sound, and all of a sudden here they come. And I used to be a lot more conservative in my approach with sounds. I used to try to play as few sounds as possible, which if I can, I will, because I would love to just leave my ground as unpressured and fresh as possible. But if I have to, I'll rifle through the sounds until I can figure out what's going to make them come or not. And sometimes they just won't. I think if they can see what they want to see, sometimes they just aren't going to come in. We had that experience in Wyoming, last week a lot, where they would be at 1,600 yards and they're not coming any closer because they can see what they need to see. It's a lot like people that are really good turkey hunters are usually would be really good coyote hunters, because the way you think about a hang up spot for a turkey, when they're coming into the call with no decoys, especially, coyotes do the same thing. They'll get to a spot where they can see what they need to see and they won't come any closer. Just because they can see that there's nothing there, and they're not going to come in. So, again, if you're a good turkey hunter, not turkey hunting without decoys, how you got to position yourself to be able to get a shot to that hang up spot, or try to draw them through you somehow or whatever. But yeah, I think just being able to figure out what they're quote unquote trying to get a bite on that day. And, it might be different from one stand to the next. It might be different from one day to the other. And I just think being flexible and being able to change things up to find out what's going to work, and also understanding that some days it's just not going to work.
Yep.
Is there difference between day hunting and night hunting as far as calls go?
I would say no, but my approach might be a little different during the day. I'm going to always try to get closer to cover, tighter to them, just because they're not going to travel, typically not going to travel out across wide, big wide open areas. You want to be tight to where you think they're going to be. I tend to start with distress sounds more in the daytime, just because, again, I am up tighter to them. I want to start with a more subtle sound to see if there's something right up here close to me that might come into that distress sound, and then I'm going to move into my vocals and my fights and, pup sounds, things like that. And I've seen, the funny part is day calling, you're going to see all those things work, which is sometimes confusing because you don't know, what's going to work, but it's just running through that sequence and figuring out what's going to work. And during the daytime, it's always just getting closer. At night, I'm, in the more open where I can see better. Typically, I'm using more vocals, more howls, things like that. And I would say that's the only main difference between day and night.
Are you hunting first light or last light, or does it not matter?
In Wisconsin, first light and last light are about your only chance to call one in during the daytime. in my opinion. You might get an hour on either side. Depend if you get up north more, you can get into some more remote stuff and have some success. But for the most part down here, yeah, that first light, last light, I don't think there's a lot of difference as far as success rates. The only thing I notice with the mornings is sometimes it's harder to get in on access places, especially with snow. If there's snow, evenings are better in my opinion, just because snow's louder to get in places. If you're going in the morning, coyotes are out and about, and you're going to, higher odds you're going to blow them out of there going in. So if there's snow on the ground, I think evenings are always better. But other than that, I think both can be very productive. And in the West, out of state, I mean, it seems like pretty much in the morning until noon is good, or 11-ish, and then it seems like there's kind of a cutoff, and then it's like 3-4 in the afternoon. It starts, it's like a couple hours before dark, but the mornings are always better in the West in my experience.
So a question with, if you have 2 hunters, and it's just not yourself, you've got 2 or 3 hunters, do you guys sit somewhat close together, or do you space completely out for those coyotes that might, be on that fringe 300, 400 yards out? Do you have it set up so that your other hunters can cut those off, or, are you guys all kind of somewhat close so you can communicate?
I would say it depends. I'd never hunt by myself, so I'm always with 2, 3, sometimes even 4 guys. And basically what we will do is we almost always send someone to the downwind side. And if there's 4 of us, we'll split in pairs. The two guys will go, over that hill, watch the downwind side. I'm always at the call, so I'm always watching, maybe the non-downwind side, or if we get something coming in hard to the call. I would say when, for example, the other night we were out, and I think we killed 5, and I think we killed two of them we killed at the call, 3 of them we killed on the downwind side. So, just to give you a reference, and when I say we killed 3 of them on the downwind side, I'm not certain that I would have ever seen any of them from the call, because they just, I think it's much more prevalent here just because of the pressure. They're gonna circle downwind, almost 100% of the time. Mm-hmm. Even if they come hard to the call, they're going to still swing the wind to the call eventually at some point. But I think covering that downwind side can really, really take you from, having some successful stands to having a lot of successful stands. And we do it out in Kansas and stuff especially. It never fails. You'll be sitting there thinking, oh, nothing's coming in, and all of a sudden, bang, the guys shoot behind you, and you're like, oh, they got one, And
how many yards downwind, are they?
I would say it just depends. Yeah. Usually that first low spot to the downwind of the call. So, if I'm calling here and there's one little roll in the hill that I can't see over, usually that first, anything that's out of sight from the call to the downwind side, I think usually it's over in most of the country that I hunt or here. It's usually over that, knob or over that roll in the hill to that next. And I might be able to see the guys. I might not be able to see them at all. It just totally depends. And, if we're together, yeah, we're all going to be close enough that we can communicate. I would prefer that we always have someone on the downwind side if possible. Or sometimes you're in a spot that's flat, or, that you don't need it. But again, that's where using an e-call, positioning your e-call to the upwind as much as possible, to help put those coyotes more in your lap instead of letting them get around you. I think, using a crosswind versus a wind in your face, you can really eliminate that big swing of the wind too. If you're hunting with the wind in your face, you're going to see a lot of coyotes. They're going to circle you at 400, 500, 600 yards to get behind you, or they're going to pop up behind you and it's going to be too late. But using a crosswind can make things a lot more predictable in my mind. It's just you almost kind of steer them with the wind and kind of picture this in your mind. Here's the call, here's the wind, here's where they're going to come out. And a lot of times it happens that way.
That's crazy. I mean, I could sit here and got questions for hours. Unfortunately, we don't have hours. But, yeah, I mean, just thinking about all that stuff, and like you said, thinking of turkey hunting, thinking of
The
musky
comparisons,
fishing,
right? When you think about
all
it.
these different things, and that a lot of people overlook, and there's so much compare one to the other, and that's because coyotes are everywhere.
Yep.
Do you do much scouting for them? Do you talked about trail cameras earlier, that you have them on a trail camera. Do you use that intel, or do you just say, you know what, this farm's probably got them, I'm going to look at topo maps, and this is how we're going to set up and run with it?
Yeah. I would say I don't necessarily scout for them, but what's interesting in Wisconsin, especially in Kansas, probably the two states I hunt the most, I think anywhere there's cover, there's coyotes. I mean, and the more cover there is, the more coyotes there are typically. And that was what was challenging for me being out in Wyoming, is this all looks like great country, but the coyotes are more spread out because it's such a big country. I just thought there was going to be coyotes everywhere, and there wasn't. There is coyotes everywhere. They're just, they're miles apart instead of a couple 100 yards apart, like they might be here. But I'm definitely, I would say I talk to landowners a lot, deer hunters, people that lease properties that want me to come hunt. They're telling me, hey, get pictures of them all the time, in the evening or at this hour of night. I get them down on this camera. Landowners, I'm always asking, they're always, every landowner says they're everywhere. So I always try to sift through that and narrow in on what they mean by everywhere. Cause like I've had them say, I hear them every night. And I'm like, okay, well, where do you hear them? And they're like, oh, right across the road right there. And I'm like, well, is that your land? Well, no. Okay, well, I need to go get permission from that farmer then, right. And where they hear them is mainly what I'm asking. But then, as I'm walking into stands and, checking things out, especially for the first time, I'm always looking at the ground for tracks. And, if there's tracks, I think in Wisconsin, they're everywhere. Any kind of cover, any, creek bottom, any drainage is going to have coyotes in it. So it's not as difficult here because you can pretty much bank on if there's cover, there's coyotes. But I'm always looking at onX and trying to figure out ways to call certain blocks of cover, or, trying to call this spot on a different wind than normal. I would say and I did the same thing. Like when I travel I look at onX so much to try to figure out where I'm going to go. I plan my stands as I get 2 days to 1 day ahead of my trip. I'm going to actually look at wind direction and try to drop pins color coded based on wind direction. So I know in advance where I can go, Friday, we're going to hit this. Like it just kind of gets you pointed in the right direction instead of kind of flying blind. And, I know a lot of people say it's just a coyote. Who cares about the wind? Who cares about, all this stuff? But I would just rather not waste my time. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to take time away from home, I got little kids. Like if I'm going to take time to go, I'm going to make sure that I'm doing it right. Otherwise, I'd rather just be home.
Well, and the thing, it's just a coyote. Obviously, the majority of the people that are saying it's just a coyote have either never hunted them or trapped them. Because I'm going to tell you what, trapping, they are the smartest animal I've ever matched wits with in my life.
Wile-E coyote.
Yep.
Right?
I mean, bobcats, they're dumber than a freaking rock when it comes
they're
to
just
trapping.
Curious and will check anything out.
Coyotes are tough. There's a lot of animals are pretty easy when it comes to trapping. Coyotes are not. Yep. And it's the same with hunting. I mean, their nose is incredible. They're, the way that they move through, and like Michelle just said, Wile E. Coyote, which is why they are so tough. And I think part of it is that's a draw to people who want to hunt them.
Exactly.
Because I think if you sharpen your skills on predators, trapping, calling coyotes, whatever, it actually helps you understand the land. It helps you understand how animals move, and how to hunt what you want to hunt, if it's just turkeys or deer or whatever, how to be smarter about that and become a better hunter in general.
Yep.
For all of it.
I totally agree.
Well, and what you were I was thinking that, especially as you were describing how you change your calling based on the life cycle, of the coyote throughout the year, that is, true also. We could use that about a lot of different hunting. Certainly with trapping, you have to really kind of know more about the animal and the biology and their habitat. You have to really be a student of that species. And then, often then like a better woodsman,
Yes,
comes from it.
for sure.
Yeah. I mean, like we said, there's a million things. I guess one of the last ones I have you ever thought about, have you hunted Texas? And if you haven't, have you ever thought about going down and doing the hog, calling in hogs and the whole big gamut of predators down there, bobcats, coyotes, the whole thing?
Yes, I have hunted Texas, and it is one of the most amazing places on earth for a predator hunter. I was down there just last year. I was supposed to go this year, and it fell through, and I ended up going to Wyoming instead, Wyoming and Montana, but I was supposed to go to Texas again this year. It is literally a predator hunter's mecca. Like, you turn the call on, you never know what's going to come in. We had a hog come in once. It's the only hog we saw on the trip, actually, that when we were hunting. We killed 76 gray fox in one night. We called in coyotes. We called in bobcats. It was just the most unbelievable experience I've ever experienced. Honestly, it's a special place, and I hope everyone who predator hunts gets to go down there and experience it, because it is like nothing else.
That's awesome. Yeah, and you don't see gray fox here anymore.
No,
We were just talking about that in the goose blind too.
The first gray fox I ever saw was in Texas, and it was on the first stand we did, and it was piling into the call, and I shot it at about 20 yards with a rifle, running at the call, and I still don't know how I hit it, but that was the first gray fox I'd seen in my life in my life of hunting or anything.
That's awesome.
If you had to narrow it down, what are 3 tips you would give people who want to get started thermal hunting for predators?
Yeah, I would say, just predator hunting in general. I think number one for me is always going to be, you have to hunt the wind. Anybody who tells me they don't hunt the wind, I automatically assume they aren't overly successful, or I just think that you cannot disregard the wind. Coyotes are dogs. They are canines. They learn. They educate very fast. And I think hunting the wind, number one, if you want to be successful, you got to pay attention to the wind. And I'm not saying you have to be as crazy about the wind as I am, but you at least have to play it somewhat right. That's number one. Number two, I would say there is so many resources out there now. There's podcasts like mine, like the Fox Pro podcast, like different podcasts that are out there. There's YouTube videos. There's courses, there's classes, there's so many resources out there, and Facebook groups and forums and things where you can learn and talk to experts that have been doing this for years and years and years, and you can cut that learning curve so greatly and so fast if you want to learn it. I think researching your equipment, asking questions. I think we're past the stage where people need to mess things up to figure it out. Like, you can learn these things before you go out there. I get questions all the time where I'm just like, man, how do you not look this up or research it? Or how did you walk into the sporting goods store and just let the guy sell you whatever, he had on the shelf and not look this up after you just spent $1,000 on it? Like, just researching what you're going to do, how you're going to hunt, what you're going to use, your equipment, just knowing your equipment and being able to understand that there is so many resources out there to help you be successful and eliminate a lot of that learning curve. And then I think number 3 is making sure your gun's sighted in and making sure you can hit something that you're going to shoot at. Because a lot of predator hunters that start out, they're going to call in coyotes and they're going to miss. And they're going to, do that whole thing. And that's one mistake I made early on too. We used to shoot at them a lot. And I don't like that. And just over the years, and especially with thermal, I probably check my zero probably twice a month, probably just, I might miss, of course I miss occasionally. And usually if I miss, I'm going to go check my zero, or I'll watch my video back. That's the nice thing about video on these scopes. You can watch your video back and see, oh shoot, I pulled it, a little bit to the left there at the last second as I squeezed the trigger, or, something of that nature. You can go back and review what you did. Similar to videoing, hunts, you can go back and watch, where did that arrow hit? Where did, things like that. You can analyze your hunt more. And that's one thing too, to kind of topple on top of that, is if guys are struggling hitting them, you got to record your hunt, or make sure you record the shot so you can watch and see what you did. I get messages from people all the time like, oh, I can't figure out why I'm missing. It's like, dude, you got to record your hunt. And then people will miss and say, hey, I missed. I'm like, okay, what did the video say? Oh, let me look. Well, then I watch the video and I'm like, dude, you shot over top of them. Like that thermal glow is bigger than the actual animal is a little bit, You're just right on the top of his back and you can see that bullet explode in the ground right over top of him. Like just little things like that we have so many tools at our hand to be able to improve, and make a shot. Keeping your cool is going to come with, doing it and getting reps, but I know it's exciting and it's tough to do. It's still hard for me sometimes, but being able to hit things when you can get an opportunity is one of the most important parts. So, and, just staying persistent and not giving up, because it is hard. So
cool.
Yeah. Well, those are great tips. And I learned a lot today. That's for sure. I don't think I've ever coyote hunted at night. Maybe once a long time ago. Yeah. Yeah. So I know I learned a lot. Thanks for being on with us. Where can people find your podcast?
Yeah. So if you just search Predator Podcast, pretty much it's available on all platforms. YouTube. I'm going to have some turkey hunts on my Predator Podcast channel this spring. And any Apple, Spotify, Google, the number of platforms that are out there. But yeah, you can find it anywhere. You can find me on Instagram, Predator Podcast _Drew. Facebook is just my name, Drew Schliem. I encourage people to message me if they have questions. If they have, I get a lot of questions, but there's no such thing as a bad question, and I answer every single one. So I always encourage people to reach out if they have questions. But I have a lot of good episodes, a lot of good tips and experts and people that know far more than I do. And that's what I try to surround myself with, is people that are like-minded but know a lot more than I do, so I can learn from them. Yeah, that's good advice too. Well, Drew shared a lot of great information with us today. Take that to heart. Check out his podcast and Own the Season.
Follow Own the Season Podcast on Facebook and Instagram. Thanks for listening.
Check back weekly for new episodes.